it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Michael Baker, or Mike. He's a graduate of the University of Western Ontario with degrees in history and education. I won't say the dates. From 1985 to 1990, he was collections curator at Fanshawe Pioneer Village. 1990 to 2007, curator of regional history at Museum London. And in 2007, he became the curator of the Elgin County Museum and later appointed manager of museums and archives for the County of Elgin. And he retired last year. He's the editor of Downtown London, Layers of Time, and the co-editor with Hilary Bates Neary, who's also here, of 100 Fascinating Londoners and Street Names of London, an illustrated guide, both published by James Lorimer of Canada. He's past president of the London branch of the ACO, the Heritage London Foundation, and the Elgin Historical Society. So let's give a warm welcome to Mike.
Thank you, Arthur, and good evening, everyone. I want you to be honest with me now. How many of you are here for the Victorian obscenity? Yes. Oh, maybe you didn't. Yeah, good. Perhaps you didn't read the entire press release. I thought that would really pack them in. Oh, you're too kind. Next year, we are going to celebrate the City of London's 200th anniversary. And it should go quite well, since we gave it a dry run about 30 years ago. If you weren't there, I'm hoping that the slides tonight will possibly kindle some memories. And if you were there, congratulations on surviving it. It's surprising, really, how many things went on that year. While I was doing the research, I was surprised myself to see how many things we were involved in. Later on, I'll take us to 1926, and we'll see what the city's centennial was like during the Roaring '20s. And hopefully I can account for some similarities with the celebrations from '93. And finally, if we have time, I'll actually do a little bit of history, and we'll find out what all the hoopla was about in those years. Now, despite what the governor is saying here, it was not party, party, party for all of 1993. The bicentennial actually had a tremendous commitment to history, starting with the appearance of this guy, Lieutenant-Governor Simcoe, on just about every piece of promotion that appeared, and as well as being present in some form at nearly every event. If this guy is unfamiliar to you, and I hope he isn't, he is the first Lieutenant Governor for the colony of Upper Canada. He was named to that post when the colony was formed in 1791, and he selected the Forks as the capital, but was overruled by the Governor General of the day, Lord Dorchester, and ordered to fortify what is now Toronto, what was then York. However, before he left, he created a reserve around the Forks, which meant settlement had to go around that land reserve. And when a district capital was required in 1826, there it was, still vacant. On the 2nd of March, 1793, Simcoe visited the Forks on a trip from Niagara to Detroit and back. He was on the return trip when he visited the Forks. He did not decide when he set foot onto the swampy meadows at the Forks. He did not decide at that moment that that's where the capital should be. He had decided that in England, even before he had come to Upper Canada. His main intention of placing it here was to get it away from Niagara and Kingston, the only real areas of settlement in the 1790s, thanks to the Loyalist, removal of the Loyalists after the American Revolution. He didn't want the locals to have any influence in the government of the colony, so he wanted to move it. He also wanted a more defensible position. He was convinced that war is going to break out again with the Americans. And so he certainly found a very defensible position, because I don't think the Americans could ever have found the forks of the Thames. However, it has become a story, I think, upon reading the journal that was kept during the trip, that made it seem that Simcoe had made that decision on the spur of the moment. And of course, it means that you can't write a book if you're writing London history without that famous phrase, the governor estimated that the situation was eminently capable of being the metropolis of all of Canada. Some of those words aren't right. Anyway, I think from not reading things like his voluminous letters, he famously wrote to Joseph Banks, the president of the Royal Society, and said, "I'm going to put the capital at the Forks." And I think that was 1790 that he did that. So without reading any ancillary information, you may have decided from the journal that was kept that he had this brainwave when he hit the Forks and put the capital there. And that's why the celebrations have happened ever since. So that's Simcoe. Here he is again on the far right, peering at us from the cover of the official program for 1993. Some of you might recognize it as the famous portrait that you see reproduced of Simcoe all the time by Moisnier, 1791. Also during 1993, we had available to us a giant inflatable Colonel Simcoe, and his head is in the corner on the far right. Well, what was happening? Well, everything was happening. The LPGA had a golf tournament here, the De Maurier Classic. You can tell it's a long time ago, sponsored by a tobacco company. The RSMP musical ride came to London. Kellogg's had a giant breakfast in Harris Park hosted by Tony the Tiger. So big names were coming. There was a Scottish tattoo up at Thompson Arena. There were museum exhibits, educational programs, a grand military reenactment, period music, contemporary music, something for everyone. Some were fun, some were more serious. While we did have a Scottish tattoo, we also had a conference. That tattoo involved not only the pipes and drums, but Scottish country dancing, the police canine unit, the Jim Kips, and the Gerald Fagan Singers. In the fall, as you can see from the program on the right, Bill Fife, who was a professor of geology at Western and a former dean of science, organized a conference at Althouse. It was to address the challenge of incorporating sustainable development in planning London's future. He had 8 guest speakers attend, including David Suzuki and the mayor of Uppsala, Sweden, who I met. The museum, then known as the London Regional Art and Historical Museums, presented 2 shows. Sidna Mercer, who was then a freelance curator, brought over 100 of Mrs. Simcoe's sketches and watercolors from the archives of Ontario, including her famous map that you see here, where she plotted all of the trips that her husband, the governor, made throughout his time in the colony. I created a life-size diorama of Simcoe's party arriving at the Forks. I had a great deal of help from Tom Hill at the Woodland Cultural Center because I had to outfit 4 Mohawk warriors. And believe me, if Simcoe didn't have the most Mohawk warriors with him, he'd still be out there trying to find his way back to Niagara. There was an education committee chaired by Doug Gordon, who was a history teacher from South Secondary. He, along with his committee, created this magical history tour, which linked every secondary school with a heritage site. And I see in the front row Nancy Toski, who had a great deal to do with this project. And Nancy, I still have 2 outlines that you created for 2 of the schools. I found them today. Well, not today, this week. One of the few things that I did manage to find in the house. The poster, which you can just make out on the wall, this is the wall of Grosvenor Lodge, probably around 1993. I know I've got that poster somewhere in the house too, but it did not turn up. It might still be on the wall at Grosvenor Lodge. Does anybody know who that is? No? Yes, it's Sheila Copps. Have you got any prizes left? She's presenting a check to one of the groups that was had their offices at Grosvenor Lodge that day, and I didn't want to cut her out of the picture. It's kind of historic in her own right. Anyway, there's small photographs. I know you can't see them very well, but there's a photo of every heritage site. And as I say, they were paired up with one of the 22 secondary schools. For example, Beale was paired up with the Grand Theatre, and Grosvenor Lodge itself was matched up with St. Thomas Aquinas. Students were provided with questions to answer during on-site tour, and they had classroom activities and research projects to do when they got back to the classroom. Many groups got on board during 1993. Simcoe's elm was replanted. This was a tree that was once in Gibbons Park, and it had been plaqued in 1956 by the Parks Department because somehow they'd figured out it was 163 years old then, and therefore it was in the park when Simcoe arrived. Hence it became Simcoe's elm. It was cut down, as you can see, in 1968 as a victim of Dutch elm disease, but it was replaced with an elm sampling during Arbor Week in 1993. I don't think you can make anyone out, no you can't, in that clipping on the far right, but one of those people is Teresa Hollingsworth, who was in charge of public relations for the Upper Thames then, and still is. In 1985, Sheila gave me my first full-time job. So if you're watching, Sheila, Teresa, thank you. Labatt's, speaking of Pioneer Village, presented the historic brewery that was once on their property to the village during 1993. Free Press columnist Don Murray provided readers with what I think was a daily series of Did You Knows about certain aspects of the city's history. Here he's reproduced the original plan of survey for the City of London in 1826. There's also a photo series. This is poor Slippery being interred at Storybook Gardens, where we thought we would never hear from him again, but we did. Herman Goodman wrote a children's play about Slippery in 1993, which was performed at the Grand Theatre's McManus stage. Oliver Whitehead, so he was given a commission from Pro Musica and Orchestra London in 1993. This became his oratorio, which he based on Richard Maurice Buck's book, Cosmic Consciousness. Buck was the superintendent of the London Asylum at the turn of the century. All of these events and programs could be found lurking in the background. Governor Simcoe. This man, portrayed in a authentic costume by Woody Lamb, a sheep farmer from Embro. The search for Simcoe started in July of 1991. That's how far ahead the planning for the bicentennial had started. A staff person had already been hired in 1990 on a 3-year contract. This was Louise McMillan. She had to leave partway through because she was married to a professor from Western who had changed jobs. Cass Bailey took over after Louise was gone. Woody was also an outdoor ed teacher with the Oxford Board, but he really was a sheep farmer. He was also a reenactor with an 1812 group called the Royal Scots, and so he was quite used to wearing a uniform of a certain period and talking to people about what life was like then. He was accurately costumed. I might say he was accurately uniformed, right down to the color of his uniform. He's wearing the uniform of a colonel of the Queen's Rangers. This is from the American Revolution. There were corps of loyalists that were organized under the command of British officers. They spent most of their time tearing around New Jersey looking for rebels, as they called them. Their biggest battle was at Brandywine, which is south of Philadelphia, September of 1777, where they mounted a fierce assault against entrenched American positions led by Washington. They were successful, but at considerable cost. Simcoe wasn't in charge of the Rangers then, but he took over command after Brandywine. He was at Brandywine, but he was an officer in the 40th Regiment of Foot. Many of the Queen's Rangers after the war came north as loyalists, and when Simcoe got here, he reformed the unit in Upper Canada, and many of the former officers rejoined it. One officer, Aeneas Shaw, who had gone to New Brunswick as a loyalist, walked from New Brunswick to Upper Canada in order to serve under Simcoe again. The other historic painting here is Samuel Peters Jarvis, who was an officer in the Queen's Rangers, and his uniform was the model for Simcoe's. Fortunately, there was a reenactment group that portrayed one of the loyalist outfits, one of the loyalist units from the American Revolution. This was the King's Royal Regiment of New York. Its commander, Colonel Gavin Watt, is the middle picture. And fortunately, we found Gavin, and I say fortunately because he was the only guy who had the right cloth to use to create Colonel Simcoe's uniform. And just to show where I was in the hierarchy of the bicentennial committee structure, it was my job to drive to King City, to Gavin's house, go into the backyard where he'd left the only bolt of Queen's Rangers green material on a chair, because he was at work, and bring it back. So that Lisa Wright, who was our seamstress and costume designer, could create it. And there is Lisa Wright, seen here with Woody. Late in 1993, Herman Gooden did a column on Woody and asked him what his favorite moment was. And Woody said it was definitely the reenactment, the so-called Battle of Greenway. This took place in May. It attracted about 200 reenactors, some from a fair distance, who took over Greenway Park and had two set mock battles on Saturday and Sunday of the long weekend. There were also two encampments, one for the Crown forces, they were called, and one for the rebels. And the public was invited to visit these encampments and find out what life was like for a Revolutionary era soldier. Woody arrived as Simcoe, brought up the river in an authentic 1812 ship's boat. So like a big dory brought him up. He was met with a feu de joie, which was when everybody sets off their musket at the same time. So it was quite impactful. We had period music. Henry Meredith, who else would you call, provided period music, and Kathy Stevens, who is a historic traditional dance expert, organized dancing for the troops in the evening. It was quite good. Again, to give you an idea of what my role was in 1993, my job on Saturday morning was to join two other people and row a dock upstream from the canoe club halfway to the Greenway sewage plant, so that Woody would have something to step onto when he got out of the boat. I had the really important jobs right here. Woody, performing as Simcoe, had been in the Santa Claus Parade in 1992 when he was still pretty well unknown. He told Herman, in that article Herman wrote, that he had been mistaken for George Washington, Sir John A. Macdonald, Captain Hook, Louis Riel, and Captain Bligh. But by next October, they were naming their kids after him. If you're scoring at home, Lieutenant Talbot has just arrived. The highlight of the year for me was Founders Day, which was held, as you might expect, at the Forks on March the 2nd, so 200 years to the day of when Simcoe arrived. Here's Woody, accompanied by his officers and a number of Mohawks from the Six Nations in Brantford and Tyendinaga near Belleville. It was pretty cold that day, but at least it was sunny. We had 1,000 grade 4 students watching us who, after Simcoe arrived, were going to be toured through LRAM to meet historic personages and see the exhibits. They're also going to experience a sweat lodge on the 2nd floor, which had been designed and built and organized under the direction of Dan Smoke, who was London 200's Indigenous consultant, you could say. I remember I wrote a nice speech of welcome for Woody, which he did not utter a single word. He could ad-lib at the drop of a hat. Not that he was always right. Here are some of the kids that were at the Founders Day at the Forks. We even had the Lieutenant Governor of the day, Hal Jackman. So here are 2 Lieutenant Governors, 200 years apart. I think we had a couple of party leaders, but I'm pretty sure Bob Ray did not show up. I don't remember Bob. Lieutenant Governor Jackman stayed all day. In fact, I kept running into him in the building. Now, I went through that previous slide pretty fast, and I bet you're wondering who those young officers were that were following Woody up across the bridge. Well, why don't we have another look? The guy on the right is Grant Maltman, now longtime curator of Banning House National Historic Site. The guy on the left is me. We were wearing our regimental uniforms of our respective units, also created by Lisa Wright. Those HBC-looking blankets that we're wearing are called capotes and are actually regular military issue. And we're both wearing moccasins. Grant is portraying the young Thomas Talbot from the 24th Regiment. He was then Simcoe's private secretary, age 21, which, if I remember, Grant, is just about your age then, I believe. Pretty close. Yeah. I'm portraying an equally well-known figure from history, Brigade Major Edward Littlehales. I'll just pause while you check around and see if anyone actually knows who that is. Well, we wouldn't be talking about the bicentennial if it wasn't for Brigade Major Littlehales, because he's the guy who wrote it down. He kept the diary of the entire trip. That's the real Major Littlehales in the Oval, and I think you'll agree with me, there's an uncanny resemblance. And his middle name is Baker. It's just, it's too eerie. Well, if you're gonna have a bicentennial or a centennial, you have to have souvenir coins. And there were 2 issued in '93. Bell, you can see Bell's name in tiny letters at the bottom pair of coins. They were distributed to school children. The other 2, the silver ones, were from the Chamber of Commerce. They were legal tender for the entire year. The Chamber produced 100,000 $2 coins and distributed them through the banks. Now, I don't think you can see it here, but if you look at the obverse, which has the courthouse, it's actually the courthouse, on 40 of the coins, they stuck an extra fir tree to the right of the courthouse. And if you found one of those, you became eligible for a draw for a gold coin, pure gold. You can see that they used quite an early view of the courthouse. And I put an image of Malahide, which is Colonel Talbot's castle in Ireland, next to it to prove to you that, yes, he did tell Ewart, the guy who designed the courthouse, to make it look like my castle. I know when the Lord Talbot of the 1950s visited London, he looked at it and said, that doesn't look anything like Malahide, but I guess nobody had an early picture of the courthouse available for him. Talbot thought that if he made it look like a castle, it'll strike fear into the hearts of the settlers, and they won't be a problem for me. We also produced a booklet on 200 famous Londoners. Where else would we have preserved forever the name of Julius Melnitzer? Anybody remember Julius Melnitzer? Yes. He had just been convicted the year earlier of the biggest personal fraud in Canadian history and got the biggest sentence in Canadian history for personal fraud, 9 years. So of course we had to put him in the book. The other two there, if you can read them, are Pegleg Brown, who shot Officer Toohey, 1898, and was hanged at the courthouse, and Slippery Jack, who was a break-and-entry artist, but who never stole anything. He just tickled ladies' feet. What a lineup. There were also, fairly more important figures. However, for a serious legacy, we have to turn to two other books that came out that year. The first, London 200. The idea for this book came out of a London 200 committee chaired by Nancy Poole, the director of the LRAM. And the committee, Ed Phelps, then librarian in charge of the Regional Archives at Western, made the case for reprinting Orlo Miller's 1988 book, This is London. With Orlo's blessing, he took it to the Chamber of Commerce, who became the sponsor. Jim Etherington, who was London Life's rep on the Chamber, was on the editorial committee and wrote the foreword. And in it, he mentions the fact that he and Ed went back to student days at Western. He was the editor of the Gazette, and Ed was on the student council. The photos were organized by Glenn Phillips, who's famous for having a beer book, History of London Beer. Miriam Wright worked on the additional chapters. She is now a history professor at the University of Windsor. They had to tone down Orlo's last chapter, which in his original book was called A City for Sale. He was pretty hard on the developers, and it probably wasn't going to go over too big with the Chamber. So by the time the London version, the London 200 version came out, the chapter was called Greater London. You can see in the ad copy, I don't know if you can read that, there's some ad copy from Robert Holmes on the far side. They probably had to have this ready so early because it was in that London 200 biographies book. They had the copy ready before they really knew how toned down it was going to be. So it's interesting to read that part of what the book was going to contain was today's bitter controversies over heritage versus development. Well, I don't think too many of the controversies actually made it into the final book. Ed's goal for London 200 was not only to update Miller's history, but to also make it more inclusive. So he's going to add more women's history, more labor history, and more about the various ethnic groups and organizations that had come to the city in more recent years. The Chamber added a section at the back profiling 44 companies in London. It's a great record today, and I imagine they probably paid a fee to appear in the back of the book, which is how they likely were able to publish it. The Chamber had done a similar thing for Windsor Publications when they produced Fred Armstrong's Forest City book in 1986. And of course, the other work we have to mention in 1993 was that of this society. Simcoe's Choice came out late in 1992. You can see the contents on the right. Great piece from Dan on the Great Fire of London. John Mumberket, who would be the Society's president a couple of years later, did a piece on Simcoe. Colin Reed on the Rebellion of 37, of course. David Spencer did a paper on Beck's Radio Railway, which he turned into a great book a few years later. Ed Pleva is in there, Peter Deborah from the journalism school, and even that ornament of Western's English department, James Rainey, Senior. But one of the most interesting papers was Fred Armstrong's, entitled Obscenity in Victorian London, the Lotto Divine poster. This was the story of what transpired Following the distribution of a poster promoting the appearance of a trapeze artist in London in 1885, the performance was going to be in what was then called the People's Theatre, which was actually the Masonic Institute, which is still standing right next door to us. Fred is a Western history prof. He's a longtime member of this society, and he was also a past president of the Ontario Historical Society. But I really don't know what sparked Fred's interest in obscenity. No. Really, he was an urban historian, and as he notes in his paper, investigations into public morality in the 19th century had been largely neglected by historians. So he was trying to right the scale a bit. Now, I want to prepare yourself, because this was an illegal poster in 1885. Oof, yikes. The scandal. The poster featured what was then thought to be a scantily clad woman, Lotto Devine, who starred with her father in a trapeze act, one of W.M. Devane's allied attractions. Of course, I could have gone to jail if I showed this slide in 1885, but I wouldn't be able to show it because we didn't have any slides in 1885. But I could have been outside with a poster and a bucket of glue. The appearance of these posters around town sparked outrage. Most of the outrage seemed to have been coming from the chief of police of the day, W.T.T. Williams, who was something of a moralist. A charge was brought against the poster distributor under a bylaw prohibiting the exhibition of lewd pictures and the performance of lewd acts. Charges were also brought against the owners of the establishments where the poster had appeared, which were mainly barbershops. The Crown Attorney happily set to work to prosecute the case and warned the chief that he has to find good witnesses in order to prove that the poster was worse than the performance. His performance was never shut down. And that those posters' sole object was to excite unholy and unchaste desire. Well, they went all out. They brought in ministers from the city's leading churches, Queen's Ave Methodist, St. Andrew's Presbyterian, and an Anglican from Cronin Memorial. They topped it off by calling Andrew McCormick, the famous biscuit maker, who stated for the record that the poster was indecent for dress and in want of dress. The defense also called a series of artists, including James Griffith and Henry Nisbet McAvoy. Some of their works are on the screen here. Neither of them saw anything wrong with it. The shop owners all swore under oath that they didn't know who had put the poster in their window, but it certainly wasn't them. The bill poster said that since the customs had cleared it, when it came to the city, he thought it was all right to use. In the end, he was fined $5, which could have been $50 under the bylaw, and the charges against the shop owners were dismissed. Fred said it was a case of the upper class controlling the morals of the lower class, and it's interesting that the performance never was stopped. He went on to conclude, the fact that the Lotto Devine case was even brought to trial not only demonstrated something of the outlook that helped give London its stuffy reputation, but also indirectly provides considerable evidence that for the average citizen, late Victorian London wasn't that dull after all. Great writing. We could use more of that. It's in the introduction to Simcoe's Choice that the Society takes issue with dating the founding of London to 1793. The intro is written by the editor, Guy St. Denis, an archivist in the Regional Archives at Western. In the second line of his introduction, he flatly declares, quote, "London is not 200 years old." And the word "not" is italicized in case we missed it. We in the Historical Society knew full well that the 200th anniversary of Simcoe's visit was coming up, but we did not think the bicentennial would attract any particular attention. After all, he said, nobody paid any attention to the 100th anniversary in 1893. He went on to say, We were rather miffed at the premature nature of the bicentennial celebration. Well-meaning city officials no doubt honestly believed that the city's bicentennial was looming over the horizon, but they were mistaken. He relents slightly later on, giving Simcoe's visit as much significance as the founding in 1826. He even castigates the Londoners of 1893 for not celebrating it better. For the society then, London's 200th became the bicentennial of Simcoe's choice of the Forks for his capital. They decided, Guy says, to overlook the discrepancy of 33 years and agree to contribute to the bicentennial. But, quote, we will, however, expect the city to host a similar celebration in both 2026 and 2055. So, city, you're on notice. Well, I wonder who these well-meaning city officials were. Which way am I going now? Here's a few of them. This is the committee structure for London 200. There's about 140 names there, some of which appear in more than one committee. Somewhere at great expense, I have copied the I'll just read a couple of names from the steering committee. Our mayor, Tom Gosnell, Bud Johnson, who was in charge of the Ivy Business School, Angus Mackenzie, John Nash, Earl Orser, who was president of London Life, Ken Sadler, His Honor Judge Seneschin, Robert Siskin, Peter Widdrington, who I think was president of Labatt's then, and Controller Burkhardt. At the top of the heap was a genial lawyer named Dan Ross, who's now retired and living in Port Stanley. He's still volunteering. He's currently the chair of the hospital in St. Thomas. I went to see Dan because I thought I should do some actual historical research for this talk, because I started to wonder, how did this all start? I mean, somebody had to tell somebody that this 200th anniversary was coming up. He said it was Tom Gosnell that brought him on. And as far as he's concerned, Tom is the reason we had London 200. You forget that Tom was mayor for so long, from 1985 to 1994. I later recounted this story that Dan had told me to Mrs. Poole, and she concurred. And she said, yeah, Tom was interested in history, as was his father, who was also mayor for a short time. I mentioned the importance of the Chamber of Commerce in 1993. The Chamber is also a key player in 1926, the city's centennial. These are the two publications for that year, both of which were of an historical nature. The London Centennial Review runs to about 70 pages, and Milestones to about 30 pages. They were both the work of Arthur Carty and his uncle Edmund. These were both veteran journalists and editors, having worked for both London dailies, the Free Press and the Advertiser. They joined forces around 1914 to produce stories about Western Ontario for newspapers that were outside the region. They became what you could call London's first communications company. The production of souvenir publications to mark special occasions and events had become something of a tradition in London. And the events in the early years were often old boys and girls reunions. This was a movement that swept the US and Canada around 1900. Earlier generations had gone off to seek their fortune in cities all over North America, and at some point they began to experience this feeling of wanting to come home, at least for a visit. There were clubs of expatriate Londoners in many cities, and together they planned these returns to the hometown together. These are the souvenir publications from a few of these events. The first to be held in London was in 1897. This is when a group of students had assembled to acknowledge the retirement of Nicholas Wilson, who appears in the bottom left with the Union School, where he had taught for many years. This was a huge school that occupied almost the entire block, bounded by King, York, Waterloo, and Coburn. Every student in the city went to this school. The former students agreed to meet again over the August long weekend, which became the traditional date for old boys reunions everywhere. It was an annual event from 1897 to 1901, and then it was sporadically held, 1903, 1908, those two programs at the upper left, 1914, 1923, 26, of course. There's supposed to be one in 29, but I don't think it happened. And the last was in 1938, except when the 50th anniversary of the 1938 reunion came around, somebody decided they should mark it as another reunion. And so in 1988, there was one more. By then it was called Reunion London. These events, as you can see, were accompanied by a souvenir publication, which usually contains some community history. Um, 1926 was billed as a revival of the Old Boys reunion and was held in conjunction with the civic centennial celebration. Today, these books are a great source for history and photos. There's a piece here you can see on the Beck Sanatorium by Colonel Ibbotson Leonard. Beck himself had just died the year before, and Colonel Leonard had taken over at the sanitarium. There are pictures of downtown London commercial buildings, a couple of which I don't think there are any others, particularly that Ashplant shoe store. I don't think I've ever seen another picture of it. The other two pictures are from 26, from the Milestones book. One is kids learning how to print in Beale, and there's one of somebody teeing off at the Thames Valley Golf Course, which had also opened fairly recently. Well, the 26th centennial was a hit. Here it is just Monday, and there was already 16,000 visitors in the city. The registering for it was done at the Chamber of Commerce, who had lent their offices for doing that. The two big events were going to be picnics. The tradition of a giant monster picnics at Port Stanley had been established way back in the latter part of the 19th century. And the two biggest even then were the Irish Benevolent Society and the commercial travelers, literally salesmen. They were seeing, for a one-day picnic in Port Stanley in the summer, about 10,000 participants. I mean, we had the LMPS running at its height, so they would take trains, maybe 5 or 6 trains there and back with more like with 18 or 20 cars. So they could move a great many people at the same time. The pavilion, the LMPS pavilion, which was later known as the Store Club, had opened that year and had been quite a hit. You can't read it in, I don't think, the tiny no, you certainly can't read it in the tiny letters. But along the top of that ad, it said that 10,000 people had attended in the first 4 days of the operation of the pavilion. The paper ran stories of returning Londoners. 2 of them were legends of the Tecumseh Ball team of 1877-78, who had won what was essentially the World Series for amateur baseball in that year. Joe Hornung, outfielder on the left, and Fred Goldsmith, who was a pitcher. Goldsmith is generally credited with inventing the curveball in that series. Joe was coming from New York City, and Fred was coming from Michigan. Another returning Michigander was James E. McGregor, grandson of the first citizen of London, Peter McGregor. He was about 70. He was a retired dry goods dealer from Ypsilanti. In fact, he owned a chain of dry goods stores. He had been born in Lambeth. His father was Malcolm Burwell McGregor. Went to school in London. One of his prized possessions, he told the Free Press, was a sugar bowl once owned by his grandfather. And Talbot had been visiting the McGregor home and had dropped the sugar bowl and broke a handle off it. Picked it up, and he snapped the other handle off it. But there's always a story about Talbot and a sugar bowl, isn't there? The original Peter McGregor, his grandfather, was from Inverness, Scotland. He had planned to go into the army, but his parents intervened and wouldn't allow him to do it. So he went off to Upper Canada in a huff and was only here for a few years, 1826 to 1831, and then went to live in Talbotville. The grandson had this grandson has several children, and one he named Malin Burwell McGregor. So he must have been taken with some of the important folks in 1826. This McGregor had several interesting cousins, one of which was Reverend P.W. Philpott, who was the pastor of the huge Moody Memorial Church in Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. This was after being a minister in a church in Hamilton for about 20 years. So you never know where expatriate Londoners were going to end up and what heights they were going to achieve. What else is on here? The only known picture of Peter and Lavinia, found days before they issued the 1926 souvenir publication. These two are my choice for mascots in 2026, if you're looking for suggestions today. Al McGregor, pictured here, played Peter at that Scottish Tattoo in 1993. You could get him to play Peter again, and I bet he could talk Kate Young into being Lavinia. It'd be magic. The Historical Society had a role in the 1926 centennial as well. Led by their redoubtable curator, Solon Wolverton, a dentist, they mounted an exhibition of their artifact collection at Western Fair. Let me read a little bit from the Free Press coverage in a article entitled, "Relics Depict Early History." What is easily one of the best exhibitions of London's Centennial Week is the display of relics and art in the art building at Queen's Park. The art building at Queen's Park is still there. It's that tiny little concrete, one-story concrete building next to the locomotive, right on Dundas Street. There's some interesting items. There's the program from the ball that was held at the Tecumseh House in 1860 for the Prince of Wales. Statues by the Peel family. I'd like to see those. Indian relics, so-called, unearthed at the Shawwood Estate, which is actually the Lawson site where the Ontario Museum of Archaeology is today. The date stone and bell of the Union School. And I'm pretty sure that that bell is at Fanshawe Village. I think it used to be on a cradle in front of the fire hall. At least it was when I was there, but of course that was 40 years ago. There is a case of walking sticks made from an old McClary stove. I wish I could see that. The Free Press called the exhibition most fascinating and recommended that every man, woman, and child in the city go and see it. It is hoped, they said, that it will be the basis of a civic museum where the old data and relics may be kept in safety and permanence so that the passing generations may see the growth of London and the district. So that when the duocentennial rolls around, by which they mean the bicentennial, when the dual centennial rolls around, some tangible record of the beginning and development may be had. It is hoped that public-spirited citizens will endeavor to assist the London and Middlesex Historical Society in the ambition of that body to establish a museum in the center. The Society has heretofore worked steadily and hard in the efforts to keep the records of the community up to date, but has reached the stage where outside assistance is desirable. Well, the Society did have a role in establishing what became the Civic Museum in 1948. And next year, when the duo centennial rolls around, they'll be able to see some of that collection in the lower level of Museum London, thanks to Amber's excellent selections. Well, let me end with a little more from Herman's year-end reflection on the bicentennial. I'll quote from it. London 200 happened because a lot of people, Woody and Jane included, decided that regardless of where our wretched economy was, the 200th anniversary of our hometown's founding was too important to ignore or sell short. So what if there wasn't a lot of money to throw around? It was still a glorious party. And when I and thousands of other Londoners think back on this year and the decades to come, the picture that comes to mind will likely be of Woody Lamb and Jane Barrett coming ashore at Greenway, shaking out the frosted flakes, waving from the top of a float, doing whatever they had to do to bring Londoners in touch with the city's roots. Maybe Peter and Lavinia will do the same next year for London. Thank you. If you have any burning questions about Victorian poetry.
We were thinking of doing 200 factoids about London. Well, I think the courthouse is going to be one of them. We had 199 to go. And I think our obscenity, if that doesn't make the top 200 list,
It
I will be
should.
very disappointed. So thank you for bringing that. Looking ahead to 2026, what would you take from this? So, because actually it looks to me like they had a lot of money. I mean, that's...
They had an initial a starting fund of 150,000, which wasn't initially a loan, and then it was forgiven by the city. But really, it was immense amount of corporate sponsorship turned up, and I should have been a little more forthright about pointing out the sponsors. But even some of the names on that steering committee gives you an indication of who was writing some checks. And it was a great opportunity for promotion for these companies too. I mean, Kellogg's brought Tony to London, and I'm sure he got a lot of airtime out of it. I think probably the thing that would be most easily transported from both those occasions is the reunion aspect. I think if you worked on that level, you could get a good turnout. I mean, those reunions worked. And families are everywhere, then as now. So, Old Home Week, it works. And that canine unit, don't forget it. People love it. And you know that thing the RCR does when they take a gun apart and they have to sling it over a swamp or something and put it back together? That's what they were doing at Thompson Arena. I'm sure they would do that again. You know, there's a million ideas out there. Good. Oh, thank God, there's a question.
Let me, just going to run the mic
Nora,
to people.
yes.
So Mike, back on the slide where you had a bunch of folders from the different anniversaries, old boys thing or whatever. What was with the American flag on that one from 1901? Any idea?
There are so many Londoners who had gone to the States to seek their fortune. I mean, there were whole groups, and often during these old boys, when they returned, they would march in a group from the train station, and it would be a big deal, like 200 from places like Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago.
And why was it all boys? Like, didn't girls go to school then too?
A lot of them do have titles, Old Boys and Girls Reunion. It just kept getting shortened, of course. No.
Or very small print somewhere.
Hillary, you're going for the mic.
I was really glad to see the picture of the Simcoe elm, the plaque in Gibbons Park, because when I first moved to North London, the stump was still there, and the plaque was there. The remnants of the stump were still there. the plaque got collected the way so many metal plaques have been collected in London, which is a great shame. But I mean, I can remember vaguely where the site was still, and it's a shame. I don't know where. You mentioned a tree that had been planted in its stead.
I wonder where, and I wonder what state it's in.
I don't recognize any elm-looking tree in that vicinity.
No.
I mean, it's
Well,
not.
excuse for me to call Teresa up and see how she's doing. Tell us where you put the tree.
Many trees in Gibbons Park have disappeared anyway.
Oh, one sec. I should point out as I go back that Kate Young is on the chat, and she said yes to playing Mrs. McGregor. So there
We're in business. Thanks, Kate.
I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the art bank at Queen Street, but it's at the Western Fair Market, which is part of the Western Fair District. That building is this width and double the length and double ceiling height. And the only barrier it has besides, you know, HVAC and electrical to having people is an accessible washroom. So it's just one of those old spaces in this wonderful city that eventually, if you throw it out in the universe, somebody's going to collect it up instead of neglect it up, and we'll have more spaces for exhibitions, picnics, any, you know, type of thing that that we like. But I just thought I'd mention about the art bank, is it's glorious. If you've never been in there, it's quite a space, and it is worth saving.
Do you know if they open it during Western Fair anymore?
They can't because it doesn't have
Oh,
the accessible
washroom.
and the
Yes.
wheelchair ramp.
Yes.
They've looked at it
Yeah.
again and again to try to see, but it's just, you know, that's just one step too far in the budget of the entire complex. It's always, it's in the back of their minds. They're never going to knock it down. It will be saved if it can be saved, but that's the barrier, is the accessibility.
Very good. Thanks.
Yes.
Dan? Sure.
Several comments. First of all, I am very, very impressed with this talk tonight. There was
Thank
at least 50, 60%
High praise coming from Dan
the
Brock.
information you gave that was new to me, and that's saying something, isn't it? Few things. If you go to your last slide, where you got Simcoe and his wife coming off the dock thing, it says Greenway Revisited. And I don't know if they knew it back then or if it's in there, but that is exactly where Simcoe spent the night before he came to the Forks of the Thames. I originally thought it was someplace in Springbank Park, but everything he says and the minutes, there's another article that's published in Ontario History by one of the other people along with the
Smith.
major, pardon?
Smith.
Smith, yes. And he times everything. And you couldn't possibly, and the way he's done it, it's got to be Greenway Park where they bivouacked or whatever it is the night before. Another thing, if you go back to your very first slide that you had for introduction, I want people to know, if you didn't already know, we'll get there.
Hold on. We're almost there.
There it is. All right. That pink area is actually where Simcoe wanted to put the city of London, which is basically Wortley Road, and is it Riverview Park or something like that, where that's area. That's where he wanted it, not where the original town plot was laid out by Malin Burwell. Peter McGregor was a surveyor, or one of the hands, if you will, with Burwell. And for the laying out of the town plot of London. And that could be one of the reasons why he certainly was well associated,
That
why he
would be
named
it.
one of his sons after him.
Why
Yeah.
so many names appear in the McGregor
Yeah.
family. Yep.
The only thing I would respectfully disagree with you is I don't think they paid any heed at all to the old girls reunions all the way through. Now, if you have found cases where they make mention that, I don't know, but it's always the old boys reunion, as far as I know. And sure, the wives and so on came and so on, but you know, there were, it's only, I think, in 1988 with the one that was done, and Ed Phelps was involved with that as well, that, you know, we started to get more inclusive, you know. Yeah, but anyway,
Very good.
again, I'm very, very impressed with what you had to say tonight in the presentation.
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
I highly doubt anyone was letting girls march from the train station prior to 1988. Anyone else?
No, I'm.
I asked a question at the start that's, what's been the most rewarding aspect of this? Because there's tremendous, I feel there's a tremendous sense of what the city, the energy and the imagination of the city is. Do you feel that as well?
In 93?
Yeah.
93 you did, yes. One thing Dan mentioned when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago is everybody pitched in, even those big names. Everyone was working hard to produce something. And we did so much. They all had to keep running a mile a minute. You know? No, it was great to be able to have involved Henry and the reenactors and the dancing in that event in Greenway. It came off quite well. It was a surprise that it did at all. You can imagine my discussions I had with risk management at the City of London about what we were going to do with the 50 pounds of black powder that I was distributing to people to shoot at each other. Risk had a few problems with that. But Joy Davidson, I think, Joy Jackson, yeah, who I spent more time on the phone with in 1993 than anyone else, turned up in my rug hooking group at the Elgin County Museum 20 years later. So we've been great friends since then. Oh, it's died. I'm using this now? Okay. I overworked it. We may be at an end anyway. Okay, thank you for your attention tonight.
Thanks very much. Josh, we're still, well, it sounded like something, but anyway, Josh, this was a fabulous evening, and I want to acknowledge somewhere out there in this amazing thing, do we say the internet? Is it what the kids call the internet? But somewhere out there, there is an audience as well taking this in all over the place, and I'd like to acknowledge those people who are with us. Kate's the one, Young's the one name we've heard so far, but I think, are they making comments as well? Josh, there's talk there, and so it's here, but it's out there as well. So we've made history this night, because I think this is the first time the Historical Society has tried something like this. And I won't say we tried it, we succeeded, because we had Josh Lumbier of the Words Festival doing it. Please acknowledge Josh. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge Mike Baker as the speaker who's inspired us all, I think, by showing what Londoners can do when we celebrate and take inspiration from our past and our present and, of course, our future. I should mention that the Historical Society, we don't have a collection anymore. So but I would hope every personage in London somehow becomes involved in what's coming up. We are a proud community partner of what's London's bicentennial, which will take place in 2026. This was one of the first events. This is kind of our launch for what we're going to try to do in terms of research, celebration, and it's the Society's 125th anniversary next year as well. So Dan, I know, and others are leading the way with it's going to be a spectacular book about the Society. We have some other things we'll unfold as we go along, but you've given us, I mean, there's material. If I would say, if Woody Lamb didn't use your speech, I think I can find a home. If it's still around, if it hasn't been delivered, we'll say this is just a fresh visit. But thanks. I think anyone who's going to party with us, let's party like it's 2026. And I hope that's all of you out there too. Mike, I think I have an envelope with your name on it.